So let me ask you a question. What do a tax collector, a ruler, a bleeding woman, and Craig Batchelder have in common? I know Connie and Javi are already very interested in what that is. Well, I'll get to the answer in a moment. But I want to tell you what life was like for a first century tax collector. It was difficult. Tax collectors were universally hated. They worked for the Roman government. They worked for their country's conquerors. They amassed their fortunes at the expense of their own people's misfortunes. They were notoriously dishonest. Not only did they fleece their own people, they took bribes from rich people who wished to avoid taxes which they should have paid. Now, in the New Testament, they are paired with sinners and the immoral people, and they are likened to Gentiles. In popular Roman literature of the time, tax collectors were lumped together with beggars, thieves, and robbers. And in the rabbinic writings, they linked both tax and toll collectors with robbers and sinners, murderers, and tax collectors appear in a list of despised trades which no observant Jew should follow. If I could use a more modern example, it's if suddenly on your Facebook page, Matthew the tax collector wanted to be your friend, confirm, delete, you would hit delete. And if you went to his page and it says number of friends, it would say 0. So there was never a more unlikely candidate to be invited to be a disciple than Matthew. Still, Jesus calls a man whom everyone hated. Why? Because when Jesus sees Matthew, Jesus does not see what Matthew is, but who Matthew is. That is what Jesus does when it comes to the ruler. The ruler was a synagogue director. We can think of it as a worship director. The director took care of the external order of public worship. He appointed those who were to read and to pray in the service, and he invited those who were to preach. It was his duty to see that nothing inappropriate took place within the synagogue. The care of the synagogue buildings was in his oversight. So the whole practical administration of the synagogue was in the ruler's hands. This director, this ruler, was a very orthodox man. And because of his orthodoxy, he should regard Jesus as a dangerous heretic. But when it came to the life of his daughter, Jesus was not a heretic. Jesus was his hope. Because of how Jesus had been treated by the Orthodox leaders, the Pharisees, the church leaders, he had every right to tell this man, so let me get this straight, you hate me and speak bad of me, but now you want help after every other option has failed. No. Jesus had every right to say no. But Jesus does not do that. Like Matthew, Jesus does not see what the elder is. Jesus sees who the elder is. What Jesus does for Matthew and the elder, or this ruler, he does for the woman who has been suffering, bleeding for a very long time. Let me tell you what life was like for a woman with this type of condition. Jesus had every right to ignore and even punish the woman when she shows up out of nowhere to touch him. If you have been following our Bible journey and you've read the Old Testament books like we have, what I'm about to say to you will come as no surprise. And for those of you who've been here for a while, this may not come as a surprise either. From a Jewish point of view, this woman could not have suffered from any more terrible or humiliating disease than an issue of blood. The primary source of the Jewish religious law and theology contained at least 11 different cures for it. Those cures ranged from tonics to superstitious remedies. When Mark tells this story in his gospel, he mentions how the woman has tried everything. She has gone to every doctor only for her condition to worsen. The horror of the disease was that it rendered the sufferer unclean. And Jewish law stated that everything and everyone this woman touched was infected with her uncleanliness. So she was shut off from the world. She was shut off from the worship of God. She was shut off from the ability to show up at the synagogue to worship God. She was shut off from the fellowship of other men and women. We mentioned the church picnic today. If she showed up, the crowd would have had every right to tell her to go away. She should not have even been in the crowd surrounding Jesus. For if they had known she was there, she could have been arrested and punished severely. But this woman risked hatred, she risked scorn and punishment because she, just like the ruler, she was desperate. And she believed Jesus was her only hope. She believed Jesus could help her. And help her he does. But Jesus does not only restore her health, he also restores her identity and her reputation. For at least 12 years, we know that this woman was only known for the ailment that she had. No other title went with her. And yet, when Jesus looks at her, and this woman has Jesus' full attention, Jesus calls her daughter. Daughter. Jesus welcomes her into the family. And in public, he says how her faith had healed her. So around all the Orthodox, all the people who thought they had it together, here is this woman who has been suffering for 12 years, and it is her faith that has healed her. Very seldom does Jesus really point out the faith of others in the Gospels. And so when he does, we need to pay attention why he points out the faith of that person. Usually it's someone who's been seen as an outcast, an outsider. This woman who had nothing society would want, she had faith, which is what society needed. Jesus does not see what the woman is, but who the woman is. Jesus is not concerned with the what when it comes to people. Jesus is only concerned with the who. In Matthew, Jesus saw a man who more than likely longed for a place that accepted him. In the ruler, Jesus saw a man desperate to do anything to save his daughter. And in the woman, Jesus saw a woman who had been left behind. And in all three, these people, Jesus saw them for who they truly were. Children. God's children. And because of that, Jesus showed them all mercy. Mercy is defined as a kindness or concern expressed for someone in need. Mercy plays a major role in the administration of justice. A defendant will ask for mercy from the state, from the jury, and the judge. But in the New Testament, mercy is what is first rendered to us by God. Mercy is a sign of God's faithfulness. Mercy is grace. It is grace that God gives through Abraham and Sarah, which all the families of the earth will gain a blessing. It is grace that Abraham leans on when things go from good to bad to worse. As Paul writes in our lesson, Abraham did not hesitate when things got bad. Abraham and his faith actually grew stronger. Abraham might not see the future, but Abraham knows that God will point him in the right direction. This is what God's mercy does. This is who God's mercy is for. Matthew, the ruler, the woman, the daughter, Craig Batchelder, and us. When we are baptized, God calls us his children. When we gather, God calls us his church. When we celebrate Holy Communion, God calls us his guests. When we have fellowship, like our picnic or our first Sunday breakfast, God calls us his family. God calls us these things because it was never about what we were, what we are, or what we will be. Did you notice that when God called Abraham and Sarah, when God called Matthew and God helped the ruler and the woman, we are never really told why. We might assume they did something that earned God's mercy, something that earned God's attention. But God does not work like that. God never did. God never will. God called Matthew, the ruler, the woman, because God saw who they were. And God does the same for us. If you came today weighed down by the sins of your past, of the mistakes you made, of the hurt you may have caused, or the hurt you have suffered, remember these people. Remember their stories. And remember, God does not see what you are, only who you are. And that will always come first. Amen.